She's doing 11 kilos over the world record a month out. That is so far ahead.
I love a friendly rivalry in bodybuilding. I love when the guys train together, and I think it brings a really wholesome yet competitive edge to everything.
It looks like Haley Adams' engine just never ends. She could run forever and never stop.
Welcome to Strength Weekly, the weekly YouTube show that keeps you up to date on everything you need to know in the barbell game. We've already lapsed on our New Year's resolutions, but 2025 is looking bright. Until then, we're going to bring you world records and a lot of other stuff happening from around the strength game this week, including the world of bodybuilding, because a lot of people debate whether that's a strength sport or not. We'll get into that, I'm sure, at some point. Before I get into our run of show, Philip Blackman, I don't know your middle name, but that would have sounded a lot better there. Should folks subscribe to BarBend on YouTube before we proceed?
Folks absolutely should subscribe. I'm subscribed. You're subscribed. Everybody who's smart, thin, intelligent, wonderful, handsome, lovely, funny, all of them are subscribed. Join the crew.
Smart, thin, intelligent, handsome, funny. No. We're trying to get wide as a house, Phil.
Wide as a house. Oh, well, you mean also, nice benefit. Everybody who is jacked is subscribed, so join the crew.
Thick is the new thin. Don't forget that. Let's get to today's run of show. First up, North Korean dominance so far at the Asian Weightlifting Championship, and it's not even over. They are coming away with oodles and oodles of world records, and guess what? They're not even going to be competing at the Paris Olympics because they haven't qualified. Haley Adams, CrossFit Games superstar, took last year off and has announced her return to competition. We're on American soil. We want to cheer for our hometown heroes. Amanda Lawrence, 84-kilogram powerlifter, multi-time world record holder, squatting big. We're talking like 11 kilos over the world record in training as she prepares for the Sheffield. We talk about why she might be the American to watch, especially on the women's side, for what is turning out to be one of the biggest powerlifting competitions of all time. And finally, Chris Bumstead. After a lot of life updates, he's becoming a father. He's back to training after getting surgery. A lot of stuff going on here with Chris Bumstead. Well, he's back to training, and he has a fire lit under his buttocks because that title he's got, he might be the first to admit it's in jeopardy if he doesn't focus up. We're going to get into that. Phil, which of these red fire hot stories are you most excited about this week?
I'm actually really excited to talk about North Korea because it just is going to loom over the Olympics that this dominant team all of a sudden isn't going to be there. But I'm also very excited to chat about Haley Adams' return to CrossFit 2024 season.
So let's talk about North Korea. The Asian Weightlifting Championships are still underway while we're recording this. We know that Team China actually pulled out of those. We talked about that on a previous broadcast. The reason they gave was that they wanted to give their athletes more time to peak because the Olympics are coming later this year. But even though Team China is not competing at the Asian Weightlifting Championships, North Korea is still showing how dominant they can be in certain weight classes, especially the lighter weight classes on the women's sides, because they're coming away with world records. And they're beating Chinese world records or beating world standards. Phil, if you had to come up with one word to describe, we'll go into specifics, one word to describe North Korea's performance so far in the Asian Weightlifting Championships, what would it be?
Jarring.
Jarring's good.
Jarring, I would say, because I think that everybody knew that they were good, but I don't think necessarily that we were going to see best in the world competing at China's level good.
Yeah, and maybe even better because they're, again, right. With China not competing, North Korea is doing the only thing they can do to show that they could meet or even beat these Chinese athletes in performance, which is to set new world records, right? Ri Song-gum in the 49-kilogram category came away with two new world records. One, a clean and jerk of 125 kilos. That's a 49-kilo woman clean and jerking 125 kilos. That's over 275 pounds. Just think about that because I still am thinking about that. And she also set a new world record total with 220 kilos. So 49s, we've seen that be like, that's like China's normally got that on lock, right? And then she's coming out and saying, with this performance, she might be the best 49-kilo lifter in the world. We're not going to see her compete later this year because they're not going to be at the Paris Olympics. Just as a reminder, North Korea has not had the number of requisite appearances at Olympic qualifying events as a team to qualify any athletes for the Paris Olympics. The IWF came out and clarified North Korea will not be at the Paris Olympics in weightlifting, so we will not see them there. Phil, a couple other performances have really stood out from these early sessions for the lighter North Korean women. Any off the top of your mind?
Wonhyun Sim, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, setting the world record standards, like achieving those for the first time in the 45-kilogram class. But we're seeing these lifts from these North Korean lifters that could challenge what China's doing, but we're not going to see them compete directly. And so once we see China dominate in Paris, we're going to be thinking, oh, when these two countries meet on the world stage and actually line their athletes up in these weight categories and go against each other live, like that is going to really be the showdown of, okay, who's the top team in the world now?
And then we have one other, I mean, we're only a few sessions in. Between when we record this and when it publishes, there might be more North Korean world records. Kang Hwang-gong, I'm probably butchering that, set a new snatch world record in the women's 55 kilo category. 5 world records across 3 weight classes for the women. Heck of a start to the competition. And Phil, you bring up a great point. China is going to be at the Paris Olympics. North Korea is not going to be at the Paris Olympics. We see China really dominating these lighter women's weight classes. We see North Korea coming in and making a statement that they can take these world records and exceed Chinese totals on the platform, even though they're not competing head to head. It sets it up to be the biggest what if of the 2024 Paris Olympics in weightlifting. It harkens back to those days in like the 90s, 2000s, when the Bulgarian team actually was banned for doping. Bulgaria was not able to send athletes to compete under their country's flag in weightlifting. Yet at the same time, they still had some of the best weightlifters in the world, right? So we do have these what ifs throughout the history of weightlifting. And I think the 2024 Paris Olympics and North Korea not being there in weightlifting is the most recent and maybe one of the most salient what ifs in the history of weightlifting at the Olympics. Just my opinion.
Yeah, I think it will add an additional layer of paint to the coverage for the Olympic Games, that assuming that China continues the dominance like they have over the last several uncountable number of Olympics at this point. Alongside that, though, is going to be, well, the North Koreans were like at the same numbers, also breaking world records. Like if they were here, would the medal count be the same? Like the coverage is going to have that looming over it, which isn't to say that like it's not going to be credible. Obviously, it'll still be great, but it is going to set up for this inevitable clash between these two titans now in the sport that I personally now very excited to see after this performance by North Korea leading into in an Olympic Games year. Yeah,
for the next quad, for the quad leading into the quad being the 4-year period leading into the Los Angeles Olympics. And again, there are complications there because North Korea, DPRK, they will sometimes compete on American soil and they will sometimes not compete on American soil, right? So will we see them in Los Angeles? It's probably way too early to tell, honestly, but I am personally excited for the next time internationally we see China and the DPRK go head to head. I think it is going to be a fantastic series of matches on the platform. We've waxed poetic about that. Let's move on to the world of CrossFit. Haley Adams, someone who did not compete in the 2023 CrossFit Games season, took some time off, is back, and has announced she's back. She announced that she's back via a podcast. Phil, give us a rundown, if you don't mind, of Haley Adams. Like, who is Haley Adams? What has her competition career been like so far? And why is this a big deal?
So Haley Adams has been at the top end of the individual women's division since entering that division in 2019 after leaving the girls and teens division. So she has multiple top 10 finishes, with her highest rank being 4th place in 2020. So in 2019, she ranked 6th. In 2020, she ranked 4th. In 2021, she ranked 5th. In 2022, she ranked 9th. Like, this is consistent elite performances, and she is dominant in any event that involves running or like long form endurance. Like, that's her bread and butter. She is cozy in that space. Leading up, she was one of Tia-Clair Toomey's like top contenders for like Tia's dominance during that reign before Tia took last year off to have her first child.
I was going to say, Haley also, had a strong pedigree in the teen division. She got second girls 14 to 15. The next year, she got second girls 16 to 17. Then she won first girls 16 to 17. And then she competes as an individual open, right? So she, in many ways, was seen as the next big thing in CrossFit for the women's division. And I want to clarify, her not having a podium finish or winning the dang thing yet is not a disappointment. She's finished top 10 among the adults in the open division 4 years in a row. 4 years in a row. Took off 2023 for some personal reasons. We saw a few athletes do that on the women's side. Obviously, Tia-Clair Toomey gave birth to her first child. We saw Haley Adams withdraw to for some relatively unspecified personal reasons.
She mentioned that it was due to for mental health purposes, but what those specifically were not detailed. But yeah.
That is a string of 7 years of elite competition. 7 years of the pressure, the relentless training, taking very few days off and really having to be dialed in for a very long season. And so I'm personally very happy to see some of these athletes take seasons off, because the wear and tear, not only on the body, but on the mind of that sort of elite level stretch, I can't even imagine. I mean, she grew up in the sport. I can't imagine the sort of mental pressure and grind that has been. I'm thrilled to see Haley Adams come back. I think she's a tenacious competitor. I'm excited to see her compete. But I also just want to point out, when I heard last year she was taking time off, I was not disappointed, because I can't even imagine how difficult it is to be at the top of your game, to be competing for the title of fittest on earth that many years in a row. I just can't comprehend it.
And it was really interesting, too, because when Adams had announced her break in 2023, in the same year that Tia was taking off, and then also that year was Mal O'Brien saying she was going to take the season off, and Mal had just come off of a runner-up finish and was also looked at as potentially the new like Tia to ascend the throne. So it's like, you know, now it's like you had Mal O'Brien, and then this past year you had Emma Lawson get us a runner-up finish, and now is also looked at as like, oh, maybe she's the new, you know, dominant thing. But then Laura Horvath is like, I've been here this whole time. What do you mean? Like, it's my time now. Like, I'm gonna dominate forever. And so, like, but at the time, before all of these like young teenagers were just really dominant in the open, feels like Haley Adams really like set that way for the younger athletes to come in and do that in a way where they're like, oh, this is doable, because Haley Adams was consistently at the top, and she was consistently at the top while dominant in certain events. Like, yeah, I will never forget the 2020 CrossFit Games, where there's just like these long runs, these long grindy runs where there's only 5 people at the ranch, and it looks like Haley Adams' engine just never ends. She could run forever and never stop.
Ridiculous engine. I'm really excited for 2024 Haley Adams, and I think it adds an interesting wrinkle or ripple or component to a very interesting women's competition, where Tia-Clair Toomey is coming back from childbirth. Laura Horvath is the reigning champion and certainly wants to defend her title. You have a lot of, you mentioned Mal O'Brien, like you have a lot of women who are re-entering competition this year, or maybe re-entering competition. We have some as yet unconfirmed, in addition to all of the women who performed super well last year. Like Emma Lawson's a great example, right? She's got her eyes on the podium, on the top of the podium, and could very well take it.
She wore the leader's jersey for most of the games.
Yeah, and she's still a teenager. She's still a teenager, right? Like, so room to grow and improve. So I think it's a really exciting, you know, I said last year that Tia-Clair Toomey not competing at the games made it the most exciting women's division in years. I think actually this year is the most exciting women's division in years. Eclipses last year, because Tia's coming back and because so many of these athletes are looking so good, and we have some familiar names returning to the fray after taking 2023 off for various reasons. Well, let's talk about someone who has who's looking to add some hardware, some gold hardware to the cabinet. That's American Amanda Lawrence, 84-kilo powerlifter. She has been at the top of the powerlifting game for a number of years now. I feel like since BarBend was founded back in 2016, Amanda Lawrence has been on our radar. Current world record holder in the squat, just squatted 11 kilos over that in training. She squatted 260 kilos raw, which is about 573 pounds. She's an 84-kilogram woman. Excuse me?
Yeah, excuse me? Excuse us? Like, excuse what?
Sorry, what?
What did we watch? What happened? What did she do? Yeah, that's insane.
Her current world record's 249 kilos. So we don't know what she weighs. It was likely she's somewhat over body weight, and like that helps on the squat, right? Heavier mass moves mass, so to speak. But she's not that far over body weight, and she didn't do this 4 months before the Sheffield. She's doing this about a month before the Sheffield, which is later in February 2024 in the UK. So like, I asked once again, excuse me? Excuse me?
What happened? Yeah, 11 kilo. Like, okay, yeah, maybe if you're chipping at the record, or you're like, you know, maybe if you're on the high end, you're like, okay, 5 kilos with extra body weight in training, you're breaking some world record. I mean, 11 kilos is like not close. Can we expect anything other than a world record at the Sheffield from her now?
I think what's interesting too is Amanda Lawrence also that squat, her 249, that's also technically the record all time for tested for the 90 kilo power lifters as well, which is kind of hilarious. Sorry, that's just a little aside. We have had like Jesus Oliveira's, Tony Cliff, and now Amanda Lawrence. We've had 3 weeks in a row where we've been highlighting these powerlifters dripping out their training lifts above world records, or in Jesus's example, something close to a world record for a set of 5. Like, they're just playing with us now. I love the Sheffield. All these weight categories are kind of being pitted to see who puts up the best total relative to their division. And that's who will ultimately, that's how people walk away with the biggest cash prizes, up to $60,000 US, basically, if you have a real darn good day. And I love there's just a little drama because you have all these different lifters who are like, well, here's what I'm putting up. Here's what I'm putting up. And it's a way to kind of fire a shot across the bow for lifters who are not even in your weight division, right? I mean, Amanda Lawrence, this might be the most impressive one.
She's doing 11 kilos over the world record a month out. That is so far ahead.
And also, Amanda Lawrence's squats look so good. Like, her squat mechanics, her squat mechanics are so, it's aesthetically, look, powerlifting's not about how you look when you squat, but like, her squat mechanics are aesthetically pleasing.
But it's nice when it looks nice.
Squatting. It's like, I look at that squat and I was like, wow, I wish I could do that. I just have envy. I get squat envy when I look at Amanda Lawrence squat. Also worth noting, she is the world record holder in the 84 kilo division in the deadlift, 268.5 kilograms. I do want to point out, Amanda Lawrence sets that at the Sheffield last year. Natalie Lalai of Australia actually does exceed that shortly after in local competition. So Amanda still has the world record, but we know there's a lifter out there in her weight category in competition who has lifted more off the ground. So I have to imagine Amanda is looking to exceed her world record in the deadlift as well, not only because that includes a cash bonus because of the way Sheffield's structured, but because it's a way for her to say like, no, I am still the big dog when it comes to both the squat and deadlift in this weight class internationally. So
given that she's 11 kilos over her squat world record a month out, I can't even begin to guess what number she's going to call for on the barbell.
Well, let's switch over to the world of bodybuilding. Chris Bumstead of Canada, the five-time classic physique champ, arguably the face of modern bodybuilding. Is that fair, Phil? Is he the modern face of bodybuilding?
I mean, he's the most popular athlete in the sport right now. He's got the largest following. He's in what is arguably the most popular division at the moment, including in Arnold Schwarzenegger's eyes. Like, yeah, I think that's safe to say that.
Safe to say. Well, Chris Bumstead, 2 years in a row, he's had injuries leading up to the Olympia. 2 years in a row, he had a bicep injury and then in 2022, and then a lat injury in 2023. Obviously won in 2023. Phenomenal package he brought to this stage. Phenomenal. Had some life updates and took some time off of training. Now, it's not uncommon for athletes to take some time off training or to lower the intensity of training, after a bodybuilding show. Chris Bumstead, very open about this. He went to Turkey, got a hair transplant, had to take a month off from basically any physical activity, any strenuous activity to let that heal. Also announced he's going to be a father. He's going to be a dad. His first kid is on the way. We can talk a little bit more about that. But while he's back to training, that's valuable time for others in his division to potentially catch up. And there's one big name that's been nibbling at Chris Bumstead's heels for quite some time. Phil, that was the first part of an alley-oop. You want to slam it home? Who is that?
Ramon has been just right on Bumstead's heels for years at this point. I mean, he's gotten multiple runner-up finishes at the Olympia to Bumstead. He has like forearms that sort of just boggle the mind of like how they could be so large proportionately to a waist. You're like, how can your forearms and your waist be? How does this brain does not compute? How do humans build like this?
When you compare Ramon and Chris on stage, now Chris has won. Chris is the 5-time champ, right? And I don't think anyone's saying that like he didn't deserve to win in any of those years, right? Like I literally don't think anyone's saying that. But it is interesting to see this extraordinarily dominant athlete. And if you look at photos of Chris next to Ramon, like it is quite easy to see there is a difference in their forearms. Now, other parts, Chris's back development, leg development, things like that, abdominal development and conditioning, overall conditioning, top tier, right? Also, they recently trained arms together. And I do want to point out the best, most fun rivalries in bodybuilding are when the athletes like each other. I love that, right? Back to the days of Arnold and Franco. I love a friendly rivalry in bodybuilding. I love when the guys train together, right? When they're really pushing each other. I think it's good for the sport, and I think it brings a really wholesome yet competitive edge to everything.
In reality, like the way that these guys seem to treat the sport is, they are competing against themselves. They can't necessarily control what the other guys are doing. So they're like, well, if I want to be the best, I have to train with the best. And so we've seen Bumstead train with Ramon. We've seen him train with Urs, who's come in third, back-to-back years. There was actually a moment, I forget if it was this past year or if it was the year before, but there was a moment, they were joking on stage. They're very aware that they're 1 and 2, on stage together. And there was a point where Bumstead essentially tapped Ramon's glute or something while they were standing next to each other, and they were joking around on stage because they were just going back and forth as 1 and 2. And the head judge was like, athletes, please don't touch each other on stage. It was just like,
stop that horseplay. Stop that horseplay.
Stop that horseplay. Yeah, they were like, knock out the friendliness. This is not a friendly space. This is a competitive environment.
Stop that lollygagging.
That was very funny. Yeah.
I also want to say that Chris Bumstead expecting his first child with partner Courtney King, who is also a former bikini Miss Olympia, right? So you talk about genetics. Wishing them the best. We all just want healthy, happy children, right? But if that kid comes out with a turtle shell 8-pack, I wouldn't be surprised. That's all I'm going to say. That's all I'm going to say.
I'm taking the over under at 12 Olympia wins for baby Bumstead.
That is the great northern hope for the next generation of bodybuilding in 25 years, right? Because you need some time for mature muscle to really form.
You need some time. Yeah, you need some time. Yeah. And who knows what classic physique looks like at that point?
It looks probably like what Chris Bumstead is now, because he seems to be setting just a new standard for it every year. You know how old school Arnold was the standard for classic physique, or at least that was what was referenced, right, among fans as what you should aim for. No one's saying that anymore. They're like, no, Bumstead, the current champ, is the standard. Aim for what he is doing, and that's the standard for the division now.
To see Bumstead sort of move the trajectory for classic physique, it's interesting to now, will that ever shift again? Will the short guys be actually be able to compete with the tall guys? Now knowing that, okay, Bumstead is at the top, but it seems like Ramon is ready to get the handoff of, taking over the throne if and when Bumstead decides to retire or take a year off because he's becoming a new father. So there's a lot of questions in the division, even though Bumstead still seems to have the top of it on lock.
Yeah. Well, Phil, that speculation brings us to the end of this week's Strength Weekly. We'll be back with more, probably some more previews leading up to Sheffield, which will be the first massive event in the strength sports calendar this year, followed basically just a week later by the Arnold, where we'll have updates from across the world of strength sports. Until then, I'm David Thomas Tao, joined by, what's your name again? Who are you?
My name is Philip. My middle name, Edward Blackman. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining on Strength Weekly this week.